What's the difference between the Conservative housing plan and the Liberal housing plan? Well, my friends, there certainly are a number of differences, but I'm going to focus on 3 of them because I feel they present a terrific opportunity to highlight the differences not only in these 2 housing plans, but also between a left-wing political party and a right-wing political party. So let's get into it. Now, right off the bat, let me just say that right-wing political parties have always faced an uphill battle. Just like any political party hoping to govern, they need to get a majority of people to vote for them. But the mission of a right-wing party is, by definition, to serve the interests of a small, wealthy minority. That's not a dig at any particular right-wing party, that's just a defining characteristic of a right-wing party. It's important for anyone to understand that the terms left and right wing come from the French Revolution, when members of the National Assembly divided itself into 2 groups: the aristocracy supporting the existing monarchy, who sat to the speaker's right, and the common people supporting the revolution, who sat to the speaker's left. I never fail to point this out because simply being armed with this small bit of foundational knowledge is enough to help anyone make sense of the differences they might see between the policies of progressive parties and the policies of conservative parties. Those differences are almost always there, and believe me, they are not random. Let's take, for example, the subtle yet not so subtle differences in the housing plans recently put forward by the Liberal and Conservative parties of Canada. First difference, the GST exemption. Both parties have said that they would eliminate the GST on new homes. The Liberals restricted this offer to homes priced under $1 million, and the Conservatives restricted their exemption to homes priced under $1.3 million. But that's not the real difference. The true allegiance of each party can be seen when we view the fine print, and we see who is eligible to save the GST on a new home. For the Liberals, it's only first-time home buyers. In other words, the actual people who would live in the homes. For the Conservatives, however, it's anyone. In other words, it could be the actual people who would live in the homes, but it could also be investors looking to add to their financial portfolios, landlords who want to insert themselves between the home builders and the home buyers in an effort to generate ongoing passive income for themselves, leveraging their existing wealth along with the simple fact that all people need a place to live. Second difference, the capital gains tax cut. Under the Conservatives' proposed Canada First reinvestment tax cut, investors can completely get around paying any capital gains taxes if they immediately reinvest any capital gains into a new investment. The Conservatives' Canada First reinvestment tax cut is modeled after Section 1031 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. Popularly referred to as the 1031 exchange, this tax loophole allows investors to defer capital gains taxes when they sell an investment property, provided they reinvest the proceeds into another property of like kind. This deferral enables investors to leverage the full value of their investments, fostering portfolio growth and increased returns over time, which is really awesome if you're a wealthy investor. So then, how would such a tax cut impact Canada's housing market? Well, as we saw immediately declared within Real Estate Insider headlines, Poilievre's proposed reinvestment tax cut can be a game changer for real estate investors. Remember, a real estate investor is not a real estate developer. Real estate investors just buy up existing properties that were already built or were already slated to be built. Now ask yourself, is that really an investment in Canada? I would argue that when it comes to the housing market, it's the exact opposite. You see, in Canada, approximately 30% of all housing purchases are made by investors. Most of these investors don't even need to save up the cash for a down payment. They can just leverage the equity they already have in existing properties. On the other hand, working people are limited to the down payment they can actually save, and they have to save up that down payment in a real estate market where rent often absorbs more than 30% of their income. What makes matters worse is, even if an actual working Canadian manages to beat out investors in order to buy a home, they're buying that property at easily twice the cost that it would have been without investor interference in the market. Let me explain. In July of 2024, the median household income in Canada was about $73,000. That's household income. Now, the standard rule of thumb for a home price is 4 times annual household income. That should make the average purchase price of a home in Canada about $292,000. Yet, the actual average home price in Canada is just over $700,000. Who drove these prices up so high? Because it certainly wasn't you and me. So what we have here is an ongoing cycle of doom and despair in the Canadian real estate market, just like we see in the US, the UK, and Australia. Potential home buyers can't save enough money to buy a home because they pay so much rent to investors who then use that money to compete with renters to buy up the homes that would allow them to stop renting. This phenomenon, ladies and gentlemen, is called the financialization of housing. And it's nasty. It's great for wealthy investors, but it's a complete dystopian nightmare for working people. Now, a little known fact, and one that I will never stop repeating, is that Canada's housing crisis actually started in 2002, when housing prices started to rise rapidly with the financialization of Canadian residential real estate. It grew under the Harper Conservative government for almost 10 years, as more and more investors from all over the world bought up Canadian homes. The skyrocketing prices of homes in Canada and the outrageous disconnect between home values and domestic incomes was more than enough to tell anyone that domestic demand was not the driving force behind these outrageous home prices. However, if that wasn't enough to clarify the cause of these nutty real estate prices, any remaining doubt was settled in 2022, when the Liberal government passed the Prohibition on the Purchase of Residential Property by Non-Canadians Act. And we finally saw housing prices fall and then settle into a holding pattern for the first time in 2 decades. Now, neither the Liberals nor the Conservatives want to draw too much attention to the actual cause of the housing crisis. Both parties would rather frame the issue as a lack of supply and a need to build more homes. But of course, if you don't do this right, you'll just end up building more homes for investors. Now, at this point, I really must highlight a critical economics lesson that everybody needs to understand. The investment we see from real estate investors buying existing properties is not part of the investment that contributes to GDP. If you took high school economics, you may have learned the aggregate expenditure formula for calculating GDP, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Yeah, the I in that formula stands for investment spending. And housing does indeed count as investment in this formula, but that's only when it is first built and sold as a new property. GDP only includes newly produced capital goods and services, not the mere transfer of ownership in existing assets. So when conservative parties pass laws to make it easier for investors to buy up existing properties, understand that they are just helping wealthy investors become wealthier, while also driving up housing costs for everyone else. Third difference, selling off public assets. The Conservative Housing Plan states that it will identify 15% of federal buildings and lands to sell for housing in livable new neighborhoods. They also say they will do this within 100 days. Such privatization or sale of government assets, often referred to as asset recycling, is a plan to essentially fail the marshmallow test. You know that test where you can eat one marshmallow now, or you can wait and receive more marshmallows later. It's been said that how people respond to that test is a fair predictor of how well they will do in life. Now, in fairness, both Liberal and Conservative governments have, in the past, sold off government assets for quick, one-time cash injections, while of course losing the long-term benefit of owning those assets. Naturally, those long-term benefits would have accrued to the public if the assets were owned by the public. But once those assets are sold to the private sector, those benefits will forevermore accrue to private corporations and investors. As nutty as this sounds, it is ideologically consistent with the core conservative goals of smaller government and private ownership. However, as you can no doubt see, in the long run, asset recycling decidedly serves the interests of corporations, investors, and oligarchs, not the general public, and certainly not working class people. So there you go. That, my friends, sums up 3 key differences between the Conservative and the Liberal housing plans. I think you will agree that these plans also help to illustrate the differences in ideology between left and right-wing political parties. One party is focused on helping working people and families, and the other party attempts to look like it's helping people when it is actually helping wealthy corporations and investors. Thanks so much for watching. As is my custom, I have placed sources within the video description to support every assertion that I've made. If you liked this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.